Season 6 just launched for Warzone and Modern Warfare 2, and I'm going to show you how I gained 100 FPS going from the default recommended settings in game to 210 FPS, 100 FPS gain here, just from some optimized settings in Nvidia Control Panel, your Windows settings, as well as the in game settings, and everyone's favorite, the config file settings, which we actually have a few more settings to go over with that config file. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you're definitely going to still want to watch this one to get those extra settings. But let's go ahead and get right into it here. Just want to say thanks again for all the support and all the help on these last few videos, man. It's been insane seeing all the support, so I appreciate you guys so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe on the video, and let's get started. So first off, we're going to start with the NVIDIA Control Panel here. These are pretty standard settings, I would say. Nothing too crazy with these. These don't affect the FPS too much, but can help with stability and whatnot. Most of them are on default just because those are just fine the way they are. But to start off with, the ones that I personally recommend changing is a low latency mode. Highly recommend turning this to on. If you're running G-Sync, which most people don't, but if you do, you might want to turn this to ultra. But on is just fine for most people. Max frame rate, you want to turn that off. Obviously, we're trying to maximize frame rate, so having that turned off is going to be ideal. Monitor technology, we're going to go ahead and have that on fixed refresh rate. So keep that there. The next one is the OpenGL rendering for the GPU. You're going to want to make sure you have your dedicated graphics card as your selection here. Mine's the 3080 Ti, so we're going to leave that there. Power management, this one's a little bit interesting for some people. I leave this on normal on my global settings, and then I change it to high performance on the program settings for the individual games. That way, when my computer's just running or I'm not playing a game, my GPU isn't completely maxed out all the time. So I run that on normal, but if you don't mind that, you can just run this on high performance and it'll just run at max all the time. So that is what I would recommend for that. Preferred refresh rate for your monitor, highest available is going to be the best option there. Next one is the texture filter optimization. We're going to want to turn this on to make sure your texture filters are optimized properly. We're going to go ahead and choose for the texture filtering. We're going to want high performance on this one as well to gain a couple FPS with that. And then make sure your vertical sync is turned off. We're going to definitely make sure that's turned off because that will introduce quite a bit of input latency that we don't want. So once you have those settings selected, I don't have it here because all those settings were already set, but you'll see a little apply button down at the bottom right down here. You're going to want to hit apply. Your screen might flash and flicker a little bit. That's normal as it's updating the settings. And then from here, like I said, the program settings, I have my COD file set up here. I run mine on Steam. Yours might be a little bit different. If you don't see your game in here, you can just go to add, and then you can browse your files and see, but usually it pops up here as one of your recently added or recently used files. From here, the only setting I change in the program files is that power management mode. I put this to prefer maximum performance. That way, when the game is running, it makes sure my GPU is 100% utilized all the time. And then once you do that, again, you would hit the little apply button down here in the bottom right. After that, we're going to go to change resolution. This is a huge one for a lot of people. Make sure you have your native resolution selected and the highest refresh rate available selected. This is where a lot of people, sometimes if you update your driver or whatever the case may be, this might reset to a lower hertz. You want to make sure that is at your maximum refresh rate for your gaming monitor. I have it set for both of mine, but definitely want to make sure your native resolution and your refresh rate are maxed out. As well as click on the use NVIDIA color settings and make sure you have all of your settings here set to the same. If this is unlimited, make sure it's on full. I have the option for 10-bit, but I leave it on 8 just because I don't notice a huge difference with that. But go ahead and once those settings are applied, hit apply here, hit yes, go down to adjust desktop color settings. From here, make sure your gaming monitor, the one you play on, is selected. I don't change anything here just because these are, or I don't recommend anything here. I should say, because every monitor is completely different. So your brightness, your contrast, your gamma is all going to be 100% dependent on your specific monitor. So play around with these how you like. Me personally, I recommend running your digital vibrance a little bit higher. I run mine at 65. Some people max this all the way out. But it just kind of looks a little goofy when I look at YouTube videos or anything like that. So I leave mine at 65, but I know a lot of people run this anywhere from 65 all the way up to 100. That will make your game look a lot better and a lot more colorful. So definitely run that up there. Hit apply down below. Another one, this is for adjusting your desktop size and position. Me personally, since I have a standard 16:9 display, 1440p, is as long as you don't have an ultra stretch res or anything like that, you shouldn't run into any issues. But I run no scaling, just to make sure there's no weirdness going on with my monitor. No, I think it defaults to aspect ratio, but I prefer no scaling just because there are some hiccups and hitches that can happen in certain games and certain titles. So I'd recommend no scaling for most people, but just play around with this. Make sure you don't have any weird issues after the fact, but I would recommend no scaling. And then adjust video color settings. You're going to want to go ahead and again click, make sure your gaming monitor is one selected here. Click on the with Nvidia settings little button here, and then click on the advanced tab here, and make sure your dynamic range is set to full and not limited. That way you get the full color spectrum of everything that you need there. And then go ahead as again, hit apply once it's down here, and that should be everything for the Nvidia Control Panel settings. So we're going to go ahead and close out of that. Next thing, we're going to go ahead and look at your Windows settings. The first thing is going to make sure you're up to date. Check your updates. Make sure everything is up to date for Windows. It's important just to make sure you have all the security updates, all that kind of stuff. Next is going to be the background apps. You're going to go ahead and type in background apps at the bottom. I already had it there, so it popped up. But once you get into the background apps, you're going to want to make sure you have this turned off. Essentially, what this setting does, and a lot of people forget about it, is this setting allows any apps that you have here to run in the background and utilize resources that otherwise would be utilized by your game. You're going to go ahead and make sure this is turned off so that none of these random apps get any random updates or run in the background or anything like that, so that you get the most performance out of your PC. Next, we're going to go ahead and close out of that. And from there, we're going to go to startup apps. Startup apps is another huge thing that a lot of people forget about. Essentially, what startups are, as the name implies, it's apps that start up the moment your PC starts running. So if you shut down your PC completely and hit, start and run on your PC, anything in here that is checked as on is going to run immediately once the PC starts running. So if you have 30, 40, 50 different applications down here and they're all set to on, every single time your PC starts up, those apps are going to start running in the background, hogging resources. So you definitely don't want that. So anything in here that you know what it is, but you know you don't need it running at startup, you can turn off. So like for me, Cortana, Epic Games Launcher, Overwolf, anything like that, Spotify, everything that I know I don't need the moment my PC starts up, you turn off. If you don't recognize what it is, you can either Google what it is or just leave it on, because there are sometimes things in here that you don't want to turn off. But again, just go through it. This is huge to make sure you don't have random apps. I know Steam will run in the background sometimes. A bunch of different gaming launchers will run in the background. So just make sure you go through your startup apps list and turn off anything you don't need, so that way they're not running in the background without you even noticing. From startup apps, we're going to go ahead and choose a power plan. So just type in choose a power plan down here. For the power plan, I highly recommend running on balanced. I know you can get sometimes you can get some better performance with running a higher performance one. The issue is if you're running into thermal throttling and all that kind of stuff, you can lose clock speeds and whatnot. So I just recommend balance, especially for AMD users, especially the newer 7000 series. So definitely recommend balance, but the more important one, in my opinion, is to choose what power buttons do. So if you click on that on the right-hand side here, you're going to pop up here, and you're going to see in blue, it's going to say change settings that are currently unavailable. We're going to go ahead and click that. This is going to give you access to these little checkboxes down here. I highly recommend unchecking turn on fast startup. Essentially what this does is when you have it turned on, it saves a lot of the system files and things that you had running in the background, all that kind of stuff. It saves it to your RAM, system memory, and all that kind of stuff, so that when you boot up your computer, it starts up a little bit faster. But what happens is if you're having constant like weirdness when it comes to packet loss or anything like that, turning this off will actually do a fresh, clean restart every single time you either restart or turn off the PC. So I highly recommend turning that to off, save changes, and click out of there. And I believe we have a couple more settings here for the graphic settings. Me personally, because I am CPU limited in the game, when I'm running Warzone, I am CPU limited. So running hardware acceleration actually offloads a lot of tasks to the GPU. If you're GPU limited, you probably want to have this turned off, but if you're CPU limited, which is most people, I recommend turning this on. Same thing with the next setting, which is going to be game mode settings. Go ahead and turn game mode on. Some people have a little bit of issues with this. This one you can play around with. Me personally, I find game mode on, especially with streaming and having OBS open and all that kind of stuff. I find having game mode on works the best for me. And then turning Xbox game bar off. You will definitely want to have this turned off as well, so it doesn't utilize any resources, extra RAM, anything like that. So make sure game bar is turned off. So go ahead and close out of that. So that's everything for the Windows settings. Next, we're going to go ahead and do the part of the config file here. This is just to get everyone kind of on the same page. So the way to do that is open up your file explorer. You're going to go ahead and click on documents here. In your documents, you'll probably have a bunch of different files here, but you're going to look for the one that says Call of Duty. You're going to double click on Call of Duty, double click on players. And in here, you're going to see a few different folders and files and whatnot. The one we're looking for is named options.3.cod22.cst. So this is a file we're looking for. It could say COD HQ instead of COD 22. It just depends if you run it on Steam or Battle.net. But this is a file we're going to look for. I recommend deleting this. I know a lot of people don't like doing that, so you don't have to if you don't want to, but I highly recommend doing it just to make sure you have no corruptions or anything like that in there. But before you delete it, what I'd recommend doing is actually saving a copy of it first. So we're going to go ahead and open you're just going to double click on the file. If for whatever reason it doesn't open, you're going to right click and do open with. And from here, you might have to click more apps or anything like that. But you just click on Notepad, use this app to open CST files and hit OK, and it should open up for you here. Since we haven't made any changes, we're just going to go ahead and select all. So you can either do Control A, or you can go to Edit and click Select All here. And then we're going to right click and copy so that we copy every single item in the config folder to make a copy of it. We're going to close out of that and open up Notepad. So you can just type in there Notepad, open up a new file, and then right click again and hit paste. And then we're going to go ahead and save as, and you can just type this as really anything will do, config copy, just so that we know it's the copy of our original config file. That way, if you have a typo or any issues or anything like that, you always have a copy of what you had before, so you can just reapply the settings. So you can go ahead and save that, close out of there, and now you can see when you go back into documents, you will have the config file here. But you go back in here, open up players, and then single click, then right click, and then delete. When you delete this, it's going to obviously get deleted from here and go into your recycle bin. But once you launch the game again, it will reestablish itself and go back and make sure there's no corruptions or anything in your config file. So that's the best way to start. We're going to go ahead and close out of that and then go ahead and open up Warzone. We'll go ahead and launch the game here. All right, once the game is launched, we're going to go ahead and hit F10. What you're going to see is the shader optimization is going to start running. Mine does it pretty quickly, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of breeze over that. But just wait before you do enter a game or do anything. Make sure your shaders optimize all the way to 100%. But from here, we're going to go ahead and start looking at our settings. So we're going to click on the little settings menu up here and click on graphics. Once we go here, we're going to go ahead and look at our first display tab. Most people are going to want on full screen exclusive. That's going to give you the lowest input latency as well as the most FPS. But me personally, because I stream and I tab out a lot of the game and all that kind of stuff, just make sure I don't get any game crashes or anything. I always run on full screen borderless. Make sure if you do run full screen borderless, you're going to see these are locked out. So before you do that, make sure these are set to your maximum refresh rate that you have, and then you can go on borderless if you want. But like I said, most people are going to want full screen exclusive. Dynamic resolution, you're going to want to make sure that's turned off unless you're really, really struggling to get FPS. I'm saying if you're like 30, 40, 50 FPS, dynamic resolution might be something you might want to fiddle around with, but for most people, I'd recommend turning this off. That way your resolution is always at the resolution that you have on your monitor. Aspect ratio should be automatic. VSync you want turned off in both gameplay and menus. Frame rate, we're going to go ahead and check this to unlimited to make sure you just have the most FPS possible. If you're not getting over your over 300 FPS, I would probably recommend going to custom and just turning this. These are my usual settings that I run when I run on custom, just because I know I'm never going to get over that. So I'll usually run it like that, or you can run it unlimited. It's up to you. We're going to go ahead and make sure that the display gamma is on 2.2 if you're on a monitor. I believe 2.4 is for TVs, so most people should be on 2.2. And brightness is going to be personal preference. I run mine on 55, but that's going to be up to you and your monitor on what you want to do there. We're going to go ahead and apply those settings. Next, we're going to go to quality. So these are all the default settings. Since we delete our config file, it goes all automatically to what is recommended for my PC. As you can see, it's pretty much everything at max. I have a pretty decent PC. What I'd recommend just right off the bat to make it easiest for everybody is go ahead and set this to minimum and hit apply. That way we're all on the same page. Everything's pretty much set to low. There's just a couple settings that we're going to have to change. For upscaling, me personally, and most people that play Warzone competitively or want the most FPS, as well as the most visual clarity, I should say. Definitely going to want on Fidelity FX CAS. This is going to give you the most sharpness as far as being able to see through different bushes and things. It's going to be nice and sharp for you. You do lose a little bit of FPS by running it on Fidelity FX CAS versus either turning it off or like AMD FSR 2.1 or DLSS or anything like that. You will, if you're GPU limited, you'll gain FPS by going to an upscaler. The difference is with DLSS or FSR or anything like that, you're essentially rendering the game at a lower resolution and then upscaling it. So your game's not going to look nearly as good, nearly as sharp. But if you are GPU limited, you will gain some FPS that way. But in my opinion, it's not worth the extra FPS unless you're really struggling for FPS. But I would highly recommend just running Fidelity FX CAS at strength 100 for most people. That way you can actually see your enemies at a distance without it being blurry and fuzzy and all that kind of stuff. Just above that, once you change this upscaling to what it was, you're going to want the render resolution to be at 100. So make sure this is set to 100. That way you're getting your full native resolution, so everything's nice, crisp, and clear. You definitely want to have that. Anti-aliasing, for most people, I'm going to recommend Filmic, and the reason for that is it's going to lose a lot of the graininess, a lot of the weird spots that you'll see on certain walls and textures and stuff. Filmic gets rid of all that. So you do lose a few FPS, 1 or 2 FPS, by going to Filmic over the standard. But in my opinion, it makes the game look way more clear and is a lot easier to see, a lot less shimmering, all that kind of stuff throughout the game. So I highly recommend running Filmic for clarity. Anti-aliasing quality, I'm on 1440p. I would say anyone on 1440 or higher would run on low. If you're on 1080p, run normal, just so that you lose some of that shimmering. Video memory scale, I'd probably recommend leaving this on whatever the default is. I personally know I can run mine at 65 and be fine. But I would just recommend leaving this on default for most people. So that's probably going to be between 80 and 90, somewhere around there. I wouldn't recommend maxing this out unless you have a graphics card that does not have very much VRAM. So just keep that in mind. Texture resolution, all these settings should be, for the most part, the same already, but just make sure texture resolution is very low, texture filters on low, nearby level of details low, distant level of detail low, clutter draw distance on short, particle quality low, very low, bullet impact should be off, persistent damage layers, make sure that's turned off as well. That's probably a setting you're going to have to change. Shader quality should be on low, tessellation should be off. On-demand texture streaming should also be off. Streaming quality, you're going to want to change this to low, volumetric quality low, deferred physics quality off, water quality on default, shadow map resolution very low, screen space shadows off, spot shadow quality on low. Spot cache, this one's a little interesting for some people. I personally run this on ultra. That's where I seem to get the least amount of stutters and the least amount of frame drops and stuff like that. If you don't have a very good graphics card, I'd probably recommend going on high. For very, very few people that are on very budget PCs, maybe medium, but I would not recommend running on low. Medium, like I said, if it's on a very, very budget PC, medium might be for you, but I usually recommend high or ultra for most people. Particle lighting, low. Ambient occlusion, you definitely want to have this off. Screen space reflections, you want that off. Static reflection quality on low. Weather grid volumes, are going to want to change this from low to off. Nvidia Reflex low latency. Me personally, I've always had the best success running on and boosted. If you read the description, essentially what this does is if you're CPU limited, which is most people in Warzone, if you're waiting on the CPU, your GPU can downclock itself. Running on the on and boosted should keep this. Make sure your GPU has the highest clock frequencies all the time, so it's not like boosting up and down. Some people find better options on or better performance on, but I recommend on and booster for most people. So you might want to try that, see which is best for you. Depth of field, motion blur for both the world and weapons should all be off, as well as film grain should be set to 0. You're going to go ahead and apply these settings and then go over to the View tab. From here, these are mostly personal preference. Field of view, I'd recommend turning this up. I have mine on 120, but most people run this anywhere from 95 all the way up to 120. So that's personal preference, whatever you prefer, but obviously you're going to see more the higher you go up. If you do raise your FOV, you're going to want to change this to affected instead of independent. Weapon field of view and vehicle field of view, again, these personal preference. I have mine on wide. And then third person field of view, I have this on 70. Mainly that way when you're flying in the air in Warzone and you look in third person, you can actually see further down and see if there's enemies by zooming in closer instead of having this on like 90. Two huge, very important settings that a lot of people don't realize. This is on console as well. Your first person and third person camera movement, make sure these are on least, which is 50%. They default to 100. This is going to remove some of the screen shake and vibrations on the screen when you're shooting your gun and explosions, all that kind of stuff. So go ahead and make sure all those settings match here. Another settings I'm going to recommend, you can kind of see it on the top left here, is in the interface tab. We're going to scroll down to telemetry. From here, you're going to see a whole bunch of different options that you can choose from. I normally run all of them on, but I'm going to recommend having FPS counter, the graphics card time, as well as the CPU time. Those are to be able to tell where you're limited in your game. So when your game's actually running and you're actually in game, you'll see what your GPU time is and what your CPU time is. Right now, since I'm just in the menus, these aren't very accurate, but you'll see my GPU is generally lower, my CPU is generally higher. This is actually how I am in game, and that tells me that my CPU is a limiting factor. Essentially, what this means is when the CPU is at 7 or 8 milliseconds, that's how long it's taking to render each frame. Whereas the GPU is able to produce frames at 4 milliseconds. So the GPU is actually rendering frames faster than the CPU can handle. So that's how I know in game my FPS is limited to my CPU. Whereas if you run a benchmark, if I like pull these benchmarks photos up again, right? It'll show your bottleneck or where you're limited. It shows in the benchmark that I'm GPU limited for both before and after. Where actually in game, this is flipped. I'm 100% CPU bottlenecked, and my GPU is running fine, where my CPU is the one holding me up. So the benchmark isn't 100% accurate on the bottleneck. The benchmark is very graphics limited. So just something to keep in mind. That's why I recommend running those. Running the CPU and GPU time so you can actually see where your limit is and how you can fix that. So for me, since my CPU is the limit, I can either upgrade my RAM, which won't do a whole lot for me because I already have really, really good RAM, or I'd have to upgrade my CPU to get a bit more FPS and faster performance, essentially. More on RAM, I actually do have a video that I produced a while back that actually shows how much RAM can affect your FPS, and shockingly, it's you can gain up to like 70, 80 FPS just from RAM upgrade. So something to keep in mind to look at there. But it should be everything in the game itself. So we're going to go ahead and close out of that. The next thing we're going to look at is the config file, everyone's favorite, which there's a reason for it. It gives so much performance. So from here, again, that file that we deleted, the way to go into it is to click on your file folder, go to Documents, click on Call of Duty, click on Players. As you can see, the options.3.cod22cst is back after we launch the game, and it's got all the settings that we just applied to it. So again, to open it up, you can either double click or right click on it, open with, and click on Notepad. This will give you the config files here. And all of the settings we're going to change, which is actually more than we had a little bit ago on my last few videos. These are all the settings we're going to go ahead and change. So it seems like a lot, but it's actually pretty quick and easy. The easiest way I found to do it is you can either do edit and click find and then type in whatever setting you want to find and it will like scroll you straight down to there. I know where most of them are at, so I'm just going to scroll down. You can see the first one we're going to change is the clutter max distance. We're going to set this to 100. So the easiest way to look at that is on the right-hand side of where the setting is, you can see what the minimum and what the maximum setting can be. We're just going to go ahead and highlight, right-click, and copy or Control-C that number there. And then inside of the quotation marks in here, we're going to highlight the old value. We're going to go ahead and hit delete. And then we're going to go ahead inside those two quotation marks. We're going to go ahead and hit paste. So that way the setting in here is going to match the lowest setting here. So that's for the clutter max distance. We're going to set that to 100. And then the setting just underneath that is the corpse's culling threshold. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to copy the lowest setting here, and then we're going to insert it into the quotation marks there. So that should match as well. So we got the first two settings down. Next one is the particle lighting setting, which should be here. You'll see the default for me is 2. We're going to go ahead and delete the 2 and place a 0 to match the lowest one here. Underneath that, we're going to go ahead and look at the pixel per light map texel here. Defaults at 64. We're going to go ahead and copy the lowest value and place it in there, which is going to be that 1 value. The next one after that is going to be the reflection probe relighting. We're going to delete the 4 and place the 1 again to match the lowest value there. And we're going to continue to scroll down a little bit here until we find the subdivision level. We're going to go ahead and replace the 3 with the lowest value, which is 0, again right there. And then one of the biggest settings, highly recommend if you don't want to do any other settings, this would be the one to do. We're going to copy the low option inside of this bracket, inside of the comma there. So we're going to go ahead and highlight and copy that and replace inside the quotations again so that it matches the low 1 cascade, which is the lowest option. This is by far the one that does the most for most people. Underneath that, we're going to look for the texture filter. We're going to copy the texture filter linear option. So you'll notice when I replace this in here, it's not the lowest option. There's actually a lower option, which is the nearest. You do not run nearest. It's going to make your game look like it's got 8 pixels. So do not run nearest. You're going to want to run linear. That will give you the best FPS there. So make sure you copy the linear and replace it inside the quotation marks there. And then we're going to go ahead and scroll down, and to everyone's most asked about question is at the very bottom, the renderer worker count. So for me, I have a breakdown here of all the different ones that I've tested. For me personally, on my system, I have a 10-core 20-thread system. For me, 7 works the best. I'm going to go ahead and replace that with a 7 so that I know I have the best one there. I went through and tested a 10-core 20-thread, 8-core 16, so on and so forth. These are all the values that you want to change if those are your system specs. This is for Intel CPUs without E-cores. So these are the older Intel CPUs that don't have E-cores. The way to tell what your system has, you're going to go ahead and right-click on your taskbar and open up Task Manager. From here, we're going to click on the Performance tab and click on the CPU tab to make sure it's tabbed up. Let me go ahead and full screen this. So click on CPU, and then from here, you're going to see exactly what CPU you have. Up here at the top right, I have the 10850K from Intel, and I have 10 cores and 20 threads or 20 logical processors. So that's how you tell exactly what it is. I recommend probably Googling to make sure you have the same number of cores and threads that your CPU should have, because sometimes those can be shut off. So just double check that. But once you figure out exactly what you have, then you can go ahead and look at this chart and see what you need. For newer Intel CPUs with E-cores, I haven't been able to test a whole lot, but I did test a 12600K that my buddy had. He was kind enough to go through the testing with me. His 12600K, his default number was 8. 6 worked the best, which is, I believe, how many performance scores he has. So running either 2 under the default number, which would be 6 for this particular instance, or the number of performance cores that you have, that's what you're going to want to put in here. Like I said, I've only tested on one CPU, so I can't say that's 100% accurate for all newer Intels with E-cores, but I would just test it, see what works best for you. For AMD, I haven't been able to test too many for these as well. I did have my buddy test the 5600X for his, which is a 6-core 8-thread. 6 was the best for him. And then another buddy I had a 5800X, which 8 was the best for him. So it seems like that the number of cores that you have for AMD is the number that you want for your renderer worker count. So just look at in your task manager, if you have AMD CPU, how many cores you have, and I would put that in there, see if that works best for you, and go from there. But once you have all of those settings inputted, you're going to notice up here there's a little asterisk at the very top of the file next to options. That's how you know you haven't saved yet. So you're going to want to open file and hit save. Once you do, you'll see that's gone. You'll see that everything should be saved. You'll want to close out of that as well before you run the game, because that can cause issues. So just close out of that and you should be all set to go. But I believe that is everything that you need to know to gain all that FPS. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop a comment down below. Again, like, subscribe, everything like that. Thank you so much. We'll have another settings video out once there's any new updates, but I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and take care.